I've never been in jail. I won't make it. They always prey on the weak and innocent. The others will taunt me for trying to excel at my work in the laundry. I'll fall in with a bad crowd whose leader looks like Ethel Merman. And I'll be forced to engineer a daring prison break using my laundry cart. From that time on, I won't know a moment's peace. I'll scar my fingerprints with battery acid, and I'll run from town to town taking jobs that people have who got bad grades in school. And then one day they'll find me, holed up in a little shack in the Louisiana bayou, and a sheriff named Bull will call my name out over a megaphone, and when I make a run for it, he'll riddle my body with bullets. Oh, please don't let them take me downtown. I want to live. I want to live.
You're not very good in a crisis, are you, Ray?
I just wanted to let you know about my study group.
Oh, don't be a fuddy-duddy. I'll be your study buddy.
I'm about to embark on one of the great challenges of my scientific career.
This work right here is going to change history.
I think this is going to be our greatest mission.
I don't have time to study. I'll never get into Stanford.
I got big plans for you tonight. I got maps, I got charts. I got to see you through this because my credibility is on the line.
It's at this point that you'll want to start taking the notes.
Welcome to the Sitcom Study, the podcast where we contemplate the TV shows we grew up with and search for the truth and wisdom within the tropes and cliches. And Amy, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
We're back in action. What are we talking about tonight?
We're going to jail, Jay.
Going to jail, being incarcerated. As usual, we're going to talk about 4 sitcom episodes in which this happens, but this was another one where there was lots to choose from. Lots of sitcom characters go to jail at some point in their
That's right.
in their
the
journeys.
Finale episode of Seinfeld.
Yeah, that's one of the big ones. So I feel like we can get into why so many sitcoms feel the need to do this. Have you ever been to jail?
Have I ever been to jail? Yes, many times.
But not incarcerated. I'm guessing this is from your days as a journalist brought you to jail?
Yes. One of my beats when I was a weekend reporter was before I would go to work in the morning, I would go check jails, in quotes. And that meant I would go to the county jail and look through the blotter, like the police blotter that they had, because they were still writing it by hand, because that's how old I am, and see who got booked in overnight. And that's how you would find out if like a local judge or teacher or, some like local celebrity got a DUI because they were still in the slammer. That's how we broke the story that Joe Francis of Girls Gone Wild had been arrested.
From the jail? From checking the jail?
From checking the jails.
Yeah, I definitely have never been incarcerated, although I did have a couple scrapes when I was younger. My mom for a while worked in a ladies' prison.
How did I not know this?
It was, I think, her last job before she got injured and couldn't work for a while. And she worked like with mothers in this prison that had infants and like helped take care of them. But I feel like that's the closest connection I have. I'll put forth that I think the reason why sitcoms love to do this so much is because, of course, you've got the fish out of water thing. You know, you always say you've got a silly sitcom character. Often, in these cases, it's the mom, or in all of these cases, it's a woman. And the contrast between the characters that they meet in the jail and the whole sort of rough and tumble setting. But also, this is an anxiety, I think, that kind of hangs over all of us a little bit to a certain degree.
Absolutely.
The whole notion that the government...
You're going to lock me up.
Yeah, just that the government has the power to imprison you.
Yeah.
And, we all know horrible stories of people who are jailed
Wrongfully
incorrectly.
imprisoned,
Yes. And obviously there are certain factors that can make that more or less likely to happen to somebody. But
and all of our white women in this episode seem to fall into that category. Strangely enough, that's not usually how it works in the world.
But yeah, this is just, it is a little bit of a scary concept. And it's something that I think, especially in the time when these sitcoms are being made, 70s, 80s, 90s, it's something that they can sort of count on their like middle-class suburban audience all sort of being on basically the same page about. They can kind of assume whoever's watching it probably hasn't been to jail. They probably have these same preconceived notions. They probably have that same free-floating anxiety. And so, everybody is sort of working from the same like ignorance and sort of lack of understanding. Yeah. Now, I'll also say all of the shows that we watched have a pretty light touch, I think. One of the ones we didn't watch was the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air episode where Will and Carlton gets thrown into jail. That deals with the racial issues. Yeah. That is all about Carlton's sort of awakening to discrimination and the idea that his, sweater vest and his mentioning his dad and all of that doesn't help him when a police officer pulls him over in a nice car and assumes that it's stolen and all that. And that also has some great jail funny character stuff also. Nice. So we decided to go with an all ladies being thrown into jail lineup. What did we watch?
Well, so I want to mention the one that we weren't able to find because I want to see if our listeners can maybe try to source it for us. We really tried hard to find the Happy Days episode where Marion goes to jail. It's called Marion Goes to Jail, and it's from season 7. It's episode 4 if you're out there looking. It exists on Daily Motion, but it is a horrible video where it's zoomed in on their navels basically the whole time, out of focus, and you can just hear the dialogue, but you can't actually watch the show. So for our early one, we swapped out Happy Days with the Mary Tyler Moore Show, season 5, episode 1, Will Mary Richards Go to Jail? ? Golden Girls, season 2, episode 2, Ladies of the Evening. Ellen, season 2, episode 21, 3 Strikes, and Everybody Loves Raymond, season 7, episode 21, The Shower.
Yeah, so Mary Tyler Moore, in her eponymous TV show, she plays a reporter. Yep. We've already established that you were a reporter in a former life, and this episode is really going to be all about her occupation and the potential legal hazards that go along with being a journalist.
Yes, and it was filmed on August 9th, 1974, which was the day Richard Nixon resigned.
Wow.
And it was aired on September something like 12th, 13th, I don't remember, also 1974, about a month later. And it was their only issues show, their only like topical political show that they ever really did. I mean, they had Mary dealing with some like feminist issues, but always in her sort of Mary Tyler Moore way, which they definitely got criticized for in that time. But this was a direct response to the current and very real pressure that journalists were facing in the fallout of the Watergate scandal to reveal their sources.
When you say direct, it's not explicit. They don't talk about Richard Nixon, which they could have made that choice.
It's the direct, it's exact what was happening at the time.
Yes, it's about that. Yeah, it's about that concept. They don't do the thing of like, we're going to actually make this the Richard Nixon episode. That's interesting. I hadn't considered it from that point of view. The first thing that I thought of was that this is the same exact story as a 3-episode arc on The Newsroom on HBO. Yeah. The Aaron Sorkin show where in that one...
Aaron Sorkin show mentions in like not even the first episode.
Dev Patel's character, literally the same exact thing happens. He gets some sort of top secret thing. They go ahead with the story and they get subpoenaed to reveal who their sources are. Dev Patel skips town. Jeff Daniels refuses, gets thrown in jail. So maybe we should back up and just very quickly explain what the plot of the episode, how does it get set up?
Sure. So Lou Grant, the boss, Ed Asner, he's not feeling well.
He's worried he has the mumps.
That's right. He's worried he has the mumps. He was exposed to the mumps, and there's a bunch of jokes about how, the mumps in older men or middle-aged men will make you impotent, so you better go get checked out because you need to get on the meds right away. So he's going to leave early before the news starts starts, which he never does because, he's the executive producer. So he leaves, and not, 3 seconds later, a guy walks in and is like, I need to speak to the person in charge.
Weird little nerdy guy.
Right. And so Mary's like, well, I'm the associate producer. Our producer's not here right now, so I'm the associate producer. Yeah, come on in. And they go into the office, and then she comes back out and he leaves, and she has written up this story. He's given her these documents that prove that there was some, I don't remember the amount of money.
Let's go through this nice and slow. They use the word graft.
Yes.
Now,
and it was a lot of money, even at the time.
Just so I know that you know, what does graft mean? Is that like bribe?
I think so. I feel like graft is like, it's kind of like payola, right? It's like a tit for tat kind of a thing, but that involves like, I'm going to skim this off the top to give it to you and take some for myself.
Yeah.
I'm going to cut so it's like a skimming, like what I have in my head, and I don't know if this is right, I should probably look it up, but is that graft is like a skimming off the top of some money, and then, using it to get something that you want from someone else, and then also taking some
corruption,
for yourself.
Standard corruption, no good stuff. So the little nerdy guy has provided documents that prove this, and Mary, basically immediately, runs them over to Ted, who's on the air, live on the air, and says, read this, deliver this news.
Yeah. Yeah. She writes up the story. So apparently it's evidence that's about to go to the grand jury. The grand jury is like a sealed procedure. And so you don't get to see the evidence. And this guy, there was some reason that he was like,
he couldn't go to the police.
He couldn't go to the police. He was worried, all this stuff. So he was going to take it to the grand jury, but he was concerned that it was going to get buried. And so he wanted to make sure that before the grand jury got it, it was public.
Yeah.
And so that's why he did what he did. And then the next day, Lou doesn't have the mumps. He's back. He just had a sore throat. He's fine. All is well. And then we get a Justice Department official coming over, obviously wanting to know why.
Yeah, where did you get this information?
Why they got the information before he got it for his
This
case.
is the Pentagon Papers, I'm realizing now. This is like The Post, the great Meryl Streep film.
So, this Justice Department guy is like, that was evidence that should have been under seal for the grand jury. I need to know who gave it to you. So I, number one, know if it's even real. And number two, I need that guy, whoever gave it to you, is also in trouble because it was supposed, that kind of stuff is supposed to be under seal and supposed to be given to us and not to you. And so that's why they want to know the source.
Yeah. And so Mary, even though she's not the one that read the news, they initially come for Ted, the anchor, the news guy. And
he's also holding himself out like he broke the story and he was the reporter that did it.
But then he sort of skirts away and says, well, Mary's actually the one that got the information and the onus goes to her. And she, stands on her journalistic principles and says, I'm not going to reveal the source. Now, this is what confuses me about this conundrum. The law officials say, yes, you are right. You don't have to tell us. A journalist doesn't have to reveal their sources, but if you don't, we're going to send you to jail. So I don't understand. Aren't there protections? If the law is that the journalists don't have to reveal their sources and that's part of their First Amendment protection, then why do they get thrown in jail?
Right. So and it's not necessarily just jail. There's other things that, they can be punished with as well. So in the case of Mary and, case of Watergate as well, and many of these cases, the evidence that they have, that the source gave them, is something that is part of a Justice Department case, right? Or some federal case. And the press having that information and having a source of information that the government doesn't have to make their case is obstructing their case. And so that's how they can be held in contempt of court. And I'm not an attorney, so I'm probably using like obstructing wrong. There's probably like a legal definition of obstructing, and I'm probably using it wrong. But that's the way that can work, right? So like currently there's an ongoing case. There's this woman who used to work at Fox News, and she had a confidential source and reported some stories in 2017. And last year, February of last year, she was held in contempt, and the judge ordered that she be fined $800 a day until she revealed her source.
Yeah.
And that is still in the process of appeal. So like that penalty of $800 a day doesn't start accruing until the appeals are finished. So that is a case currently right now outstanding that this, journalist is still fighting.
Yeah, it is paradoxical to me. It surprises me that they can't just sort of stand on that legal protection and have that be the end of it. But it's interesting. You mentioned lawyers, and that's the big difference between the Aaron Sorkin newsroom treatment of this and the Mary Tyler Moore show. In the newsroom, you have Marcia Gay Harden as the lawyer.
Right, kicking ass.
Yeah, and so she's going to come in and explain all the ins and outs, and here's what happens if you do. And throughout this whole episode,
we're all very appreciative of the what is that called? Expository, exposition. That's what it is. We're all very appreciative of the exposition that Marcia Gay Harden brought to that.
Yeah, but it's exposition for the people too.
Yes,
it makes it more believable. In Mary Tyler Moore, she casually mentions her attorney now and then.
Yeah,
but we get the sense that
Lou's like, the attorney will meet you there.
Yeah,
when she gets arrested.
So, after this all happens, and the Department of Justice basically tells her, like, you've got to show up at court tomorrow or whatever. You've got some thinking to do because, at some point you are going to have to report to jail if you don't tell us who did this. And so this is another thing where even though we are going to get to see the jail later, we get a lot of off-camera stuff in the first half of this episode.
Yeah.
We get a whole trial or deposition or whatever that happens totally off-screen, but Mary comes back and fills in everybody that she refused to name her source during the hearing.
Yep.
And, they gave her like 24 hours or whatever, and then she is going to be taken to jail.
Yep. And so Betty White, one of two episodes that we have on this show with Betty White, she gives a nice little speech about how, we should have a party for you before you go away.
Yeah, that's her solution. She comes, it's funny, the last time we saw her on this show was the Thanksgiving episode.
Yes, where they were shooting her Christmas episode, so she made a Christmas dinner, and then they all sang Christmas carols.
Yeah, she mentions her Thanksgiving special here. She says that, she had to take a stand once because they wanted her to do some sort of product placement in her special or something.
Yes.
We get that classic Betty White sort of like comedy structure where she says a bunch of really nice stuff and then she says, I told them they could stick their giblets right up their nose.
Yep.
And everybody goes wild. But yeah, it's her idea that they're going to have a going to jail party basically for Mary back at her house. So, she makes the little tin cans or whatever that you get in jail to rattle against the
She said,
bars.
we'll have cocktails in tin cans. It'll be so fun.
Yeah. But yeah, nobody, we get the whole cast as usual.
At Mary's house. Yeah. There's always like at some point, whether it's Rhoda and, Cloris Leachman or like, the neighbors or it's the people from the station, like at some point in every episode, people are over at Mary's house.
It tends to be like, first half of the episode at work, second half of the episode at her house. Just like life, I guess.
Right,
a day.
Like a day, except for it's taking place over a couple of days. But so they're all there. It's kind of a lackluster party.
Yeah.
But the thing that I really liked about this part of the episode, well, and even, Lou comes to visit her in the jail too. But she and Lou have this, kind of relationship where he's like the, big grumpy gruff boss.
One of the original grumpy bosses, for sure.
And they, he has an affection for Mary anyway, but we really get to see it in this.
Oh, yeah.
And he, he also is like burnt out, is very cynical about the news but in this episode, all of that kind of slides to the wayside, and he's the one telling Ted, you don't have to say that. And then Ted kind of like parrots it back when Ted is the one in the hot seat.
He goes on a whole journey. It's really, he's the one, because, his whole thing about having the mumps, that was to get him, Lou, out of the office for the beginning so that this would all fall on Mary. Yeah. But once he's back, you're right. He's the one telling them, you don't have to give up your sources to the Department of Justice and all of that. And then when Mary consults him at the end of the workday, and he gives a whole little speech about like a journalist has a responsibility, and this is the precedent it would set if you were to give that up, and it would lead to all kinds of, government oppression and everything. And then when she like totally sort of heeds his advice and basically doubles down on it and is getting ready to go off to prison, jail. Yeah, he feels this sense of responsibility, like, oh, she's going to jail because of what I said. And if it wasn't for me, she might have just said, oh, yeah, it was that guy with the glasses.
Right. And he basically, so later on when Mary is in jail, the emotional arc of the episode kind of fulfills itself when he comes to visit her, and they have this beautiful heart-to-heart where he sort of gruffly tries to explain, but without saying it because he doesn't talk about emotional things, that Mary's like a daughter to him. Yeah. And what he says is, if you were my daughter, I would, tell you to give up your source. And she was like, look me in the eye and tell me that you want me to do that. And he says it to her, looking at her face, and she goes, you're looking at my nose, and he's like, oh, and so he can't, get past his own journalistic ethics, but he also, really cares for Mary and feels awful about this. And so it was really nice to see, one of these grumpy, horrible bosses, like burnt out, cynical guys kind of getting inspired again by journalism, and then also recognizing that he cares for his employees.
Yeah, and it's all totally organic. It's not like, oh, we just decided to make an episode where, the grumpy guy has a heart. Like, it's going to the reason why he cares about journalism in the first place, and you could totally imagine, like, this is a guy who has not been presented with the situation this, nuanced or interesting or challenging for a long time. And it's kind of, taking him back to his roots.
Yeah, and why he got into the business in the first place.
And why he respects Mary.
Exactly. Because way back in pilot episode, she was just some bumpkin from the middle of nowhere, Minnesota, and coming to the big city, Minneapolis, with big dreams and wanting to be a producer and be in the news and all of that.
But she does go to jail. The Department of Justice guy shows up at the house. I just wanted to mention Ted was trying to save the party by doing a Cagney impression, the you dirty rat thing.
But he kept doing this thing with buck teeth. What was that about?
Well, that's the thing. I can't really tell you because I barely know what James Cagney looks like. And it's just so wild to me that this impression was still being done by Michelangelo in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, The Secret of the Ooze.
Yes.
In like 1994.
Cinematic masterpiece. You dirty rat.
Yeah. That you dirty rat thing. And I mean, look, that movie came out when I was a kid, the Ninja Turtles one.
I was saying, not the you dirty rat.
It was pretty much over my head. I mean, that movie is from, the Cagney movies are from like the 40s.
Or 30s.
I think 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
And so it just astounds me how that impression and that specific phrase, you dirty rat, endured for like 80 years before people stopped getting it. But so the guy eventually comes and handcuffs her. Just watching that made me feel like I would not like to be handcuffed. That is not something that appeals to me.
There are definitely some people who enjoy being handcuffed, but not necessarily in that context.
But they take her to jail. And we get our first instance of the lady being thrown into jail. Her cellmates are sex workers.
That's right.
I was pleasantly surprised that this was not the case in all of the episodes.
Yes.
I honestly thought that every single one of them would have this subtrope.
Right.
But they don't. But this one does. It's, you know, what I said before about how like these episodes sort of presume this kind of like middle-class suburban audience that's all sort of on the same page. I really feel like you see that in general, the way the media treated sex workers in the 80s and 90s.
And now. Yeah.
Well, I think it's changing. But yeah, I feel like the same way, you know, throughout our lifetime, we saw, you know, this attitude about LGBT characters be like, oh, okay, we're not going to be like overtly hateful, but we're going to have just this sort of snickering attitude,
right.
You know, and that's very much what you see in all of this. Like the shows just sort of have this attitude, like, isn't it funny that there are prostitutes?
Yeah, well, but snickering attitude is absolutely right. It's always the same jokes, you know, and look, some of the jokes are funny. Like there's a joke in Golden Girls, you know, where it's like, hey, you know, something about don't, you know, there's nothing wrong with, you know, being career oriented or whatever. Yeah. And when Blanche was talking about like, you know, all the conquests or whatever. And I think that, you know, there were ways that it was pretty, you know, that the snarky attitude actually was written well and it was funny. But yeah, absolutely. And in this instance, I'm trying to remember what was the comment that let us even know that this woman was a prostitute.
I'll tell you.
Because she wasn't all tarted up the way what you and I are used to seeing.
It's all relative. This was the 70s. And yeah, I think those stereotypes did exist. But I think by the time we were around, there was like a firmly established Halloween costume for like street walking prostitutes.
Yeah.
And they don't quite look like that. I wouldn't say that they're dressed like conservatively, but yeah, they're these two young women. And at some point, Mary is explaining her situation to them. Oh, because they're reading it in the newspaper, which I wrote that down in my notes. Like, do you get the daily newspaper delivered in prison? But anyway, these young ladies are reading about Mary in the newspaper. She's explaining her situation to them. And they say, so you mean they put you in jail just for doing your job? And she says, yeah. And they say, just like us.
Just like us. That's right. That's right.
I think you're right that it's meant to be a little bit less explicit, and like maybe if a child were watching, they wouldn't know exactly what it is, but it definitely is, you know, you're meant to understand that they're prostitutes.
So hold on though, because we got to talk about the woman who, there was the one woman who was really, 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 really skinny and had the higher, squeakier voice. And then the other woman who kind of had that sort of like husky, like, hey, kind of a voice, right? So that woman, there's an interview that like a clip of an interview you can watch of James Burrows, Jimmy Burrows, as those of us who know him call him, you know, of him talking about this episode and it being this, you know, There Were Only Issues episode and whatever. And he mentions this actress who played the like husky voiced sex worker, and her name's Barbara Colby, and he talks about her as being one of these guest stars, not even a guest star, like, you know, guest player, who was so funny that the studio audience was just roaring, laughing at the interactions between her and Mary and the lines and the things that they would do and all of it. They invited her back. She comes back in an episode later in this season, goes to the TV station to seek out a job from Mary because she wants to go legit, right? She was again beloved. And this is the last season of Mary Tyler Moore that Cloris Leachman is still on it. In the next season, she spins off into her own show, Phyllis. The second lead in Phyllis was going to be this woman, Barbara Colby, who played this prostitute because she had done such a great job. She was so fabulous. They shot 3 episodes, and this was like, she was about to have her big break. And she was murdered in a parking garage in Los Angeles. A random gang killing, like one of those things, like she and her boyfriend were shot, and he didn't die right away. He was able to explain that it was like totally random, and they didn't know, and they didn't even try to rob them or anything like that. And so then they ended up replacing her and reshooting those 3 episodes. But isn't that horrible?
Yes.
Like, it just breaks your heart.
That is extremely disturbing.
By the way, still unsolved for all of those cold case podcast listeners out there.
So, yeah, I don't know if she's the one that when Lou shows up to jail, she goes, "We've had some tough looking chicks in this place, but this one takes the cake." I thought that was a good line. And then, yeah, Lou comes by. This is where I put, where is the Marcia Gay Harden character? Like,
right.
Where just throughout all of this, Lou coming in and again having the conversation about what she should do, and, her saying, "Oh, my lawyer is on the case and eventually I'll get out on appeal," or whatever. And yeah, just really started wondering, like, there should be a lawyer that is like, playing a central role in this. But yeah, it ends on a note of complete uncertainty. Like, Lou comes, they have a heart-to-heart talk where we get, all the stuff we already talked about. Lou is proud of her because she's embodying these journalistic ethics. And it just kind of ends
and is so filled with guilt because he, gave her the advice, and she tells him, "Please don't feel guilty. I knew what you were going to say before I even walked in. I purposefully came to you to hear that from you because I needed to hear it, and I knew that's what you would say."
Yeah. And so she's like, "Yeah, I'm optimistic. I think that things will work themselves out." And the episode just ends with her sitting in jail. And, I don't know, did they follow up on this, I wonder?
Not that I found anywhere. Like, I think it was,
these were the days where nobody remembers the previous.
Exactly. Week. But I also think it's one of those things where... in the United States, right? Not everywhere, obviously, but in the United States, there are these First Amendment protections. We have freedom of the press. And even in the case of, like Woodward and Bernstein, where they tried and, to figure out who Deep Throat was, obviously we know that wasn't revealed until just 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
They had some trials and tribulations, but eventually, got through it. And their careers definitely weren't ruined because of it. The same thing isn't true, though, in local markets. A local sheriff can bury a little reporter like me. You know what I mean? Not that this happened, but that is there. Like, people in power in tiny little towns can bury people without power. And so that's why when the big cases make such big headlines, that it makes a difference, that people know that this is true and that this is unjust. And even small cases in small little towns will blow up and go, big and get lots of attention, because there are people who have power, and there are people in the press who don't. And there are people in the press who do. So, there's all sorts of... It's all corporations now, which is the most scary thing.
Well, yeah, I would argue that stuff is the real crux of this episode. Yeah. That this, even though this absolutely fits in with our trope, and we can track all of our subtropes of the sex workers in the prison and the just sort of general fish out of water vibe of it, this really is more of, like you said, this sort of issues-oriented episode about this character that's a journalist, and sometimes that's sort of incidental. Like, now we're going to really dig into the challenges of that and the relevance of it. All right, so let's at least track first character in jail for, what would you call this? Obstruction of justice?
No, contempt of court.
Contempt of court. Okay, let's move on to the Golden Girls.
Season 2, Episode 2, Ladies of the Evening.
Yep, we are old pals with the Golden Gals at this point. We've covered them many times. In fact, we actually covered most of them just last episode for the Christmas Carol thing when we did
right.
Golden Palace. But yeah, this one is Ladies of the Evening, so you can guess whether or not it's going to abide by the sex worker trope. This starts with their handyman or their exterminator.
Yes. Yes.
And I guess
everyone in Florida has a pest control guy.
well, the joke here, which I like, is their exterminator is extremely eloquent.
Yes.
Like he speaks entirely in these SAT words. And I think that's a fun old-timey sitcom gag.
Well, and it was really cute because every time he would, he's in his coveralls, he's crawling around in crawl spaces, he's, sifting through mouse shit and cockroaches and termites and whatever. And then when he's talking about his, what he's found, he's doing it, like you said, in these SAT words. And always one of the characters is like, so you mean you got to crawl under the house? And he's like, well, if you want to simplify it, anybody can make it sound like that.
Yeah, either that or he'll say some fancy word that kind of sounds like a sex thing or something, and they'll make a joke. But yeah, he says, your infestation profile is threefold, and then he goes on to explain, I need to perform a cursory inspection of your subterranean substructure. And yeah, Dorothy's like, you mean look under the house?
You mean you gotta crawl in the crawl space?
But yeah, so that's just like Lou Grant needed to have the mumps to get out of the office. The Golden Girls are going to need to have a termite infestation to justify all of them getting out of the house and going to Miami. They learn about the termites at the same time that Blanche comes home and says, for the first of like 800 times in this episode, Mr. Burt Reynolds. She's obsessed with Mr. Burt Reynolds. What did she win a radio contest? What happened?
I think she won. She won like a raffle or something, or like a lottery, but more like a drawing. And yeah, what she won were 3 passes to this kind of, I don't know if it was a movie premiere or it was like a party for a movie before the premiere or something like that, in the run up to the premiere or something, where Mr. Burt Reynolds was going to be there. Yes. And they were so excited. It was, down on the beach in Miami. They live in Miami. And so, they find out from their pest control guy that they do have termites under their house, and so it needs to be tented, and they've got to leave for a few days. So they're like, well, let's just make a weekend of it.
Yeah. Now we have to mention, of course, Blanche only has 3 tickets to Burt Reynolds.
4 Golden Girls.
There are 4 Golden Girls. Sophia is the odd one out.
Yes.
And she can't go to Burt Reynolds. She can come to Miami, but she's going to have to stay.
They're all in Miami.
To the beach.
Yeah, to go down to the hotel. Obviously, because she can't stay in the... She goes, what, are you going to leave me here with the termites and the gas?
Yeah, so she gets to go to the beach, but she's going to have to stay in the hotel. And so we get a hotel scene. They show up. They've got their little room. Sophia pulls...
the room looks really nice. It's very 80s, very Miami, like very Florida. It's got like teals and pinks, and a lot of the wall fixtures and lamps are sort of have that sort of shell kind of shape, the like spirally sort of conical looking things. And yeah, it's very, very Miami.
Yeah, Sophia pulls her prank phone trick again. Remember, one of the other times we talked about the Golden Girls, she was pretending to be Gorbachev and Reagan and trying to trick everybody. Now she's trying to be Burt Reynolds, right? And trick Blanche.
Not be Burt Reynolds. She's trying to be somebody from the thing, saying that not that the party is canceled, but that they that Blanche can't go or something.
I guess she couldn't be Burt Reynolds. Yeah. She wouldn't pull that off.
No.
But yeah, it doesn't work. And so the 3 of them, Dorothy, Blanche, and Rose, are going to head out to this concert. They go down, or this party or whatever it is.
Yeah. They make a point, though, to say, how are they going to possibly afford a hotel on Miami Beach because it's so expensive? And then when they find this great place, they're like, Blanche, how did you find this? And she was like, well, I just kept calling around until I found something. And then this one was in our price range and they had an availability. And it's way nicer than I thought it was going to be.
Yes, we should mention that even back at the house, they were saying, how are we ever going to afford that? And she said, we don't need to stay at the same hotel. We'll find a cheaper one. And that blew right by me. But that's all going to matter because I was very incredulous about this, everything that happens in this next span of the episode. They show you before the Golden Girls even come down. We get a sort of omniscient point of view. We get the hotel clerk at this hotel is also a pimp. Like, is this, I understand that there are hotels that are sort of complicit with the sex racket, but we get to
this guy's a one-stop shop.
Yeah.
He is the concierge and also is taking the money to rent out the rooms by the hour.
He's quoting rates for the girls. A man walks up with a young lady on his arm. And so you think, oh, okay, fine. They're going to bang in this hotel. That makes sense. But then the guy starts doing his business with the hotel clerk.
Yes.
The hotel clerk goes, the room is 100 and the girl's 150 or whatever it is.
Right.
And so we establish this is a house of ill repute, as they used to say.
Yes.
A
brothel that takes real reservations as a cover.
Right. So that's the point I'm skeptical about. Number one, that the hotel clerk is also like managing the sex trafficking. But okay.
I mean, who better though?
I guess. Blanche, Dorothy, and Rose come down. I guess is the idea that like they're going to have a drink and then head out to wherever they're going?
Yes. Blanche is like, oh, there's so many men hanging out in this bar, in this lobby bar, in this hotel bar. Let's go over and check out the scenery. So she, wants to go and pregame by having a drink at the hotel bar because there's so many men.
Yeah.
So they walk over and they sit down and order a drink. And then this man comes over, and then it is immediately followed by his two other friends, right. And they're all in from Kenosha.
So this is point number 2 that I'm extremely skeptical about, and I mean no disrespect to any of these 3 ladies. They're all very lovely, but these guys just assume that they're prostitutes.
Well, because that's what everybody and you can tell by the set dressing, not by what's actually on the set, by all the people, all of the women and all of the men that are milling around in the lobby and in the hotel bar are all very clearly sex workers and Johns.
Yes. And the Golden Girls stick out like a sore thumb. And this is where I'm just being a dope about it, because I feel like I need to approach this. The episode approaches it like the Muppet movies, where nobody notices that Kermit's a frog when they're talking to him. Like instead of the real reaction that would be like, oh, these older ladies that are dressed in like ball gowns and stuff are clearly don't understand where they are. Everybody just kind of takes that for granted and just assumes like, well, you're here, you are obviously sex workers, and we choose you.
Well, no, they even explain that. Like the guys explain that when they get, they're coming on a little strong. And at first, Blanche is like, oh, yeah, kind of liking that. And then they start coming on kind of even stronger. And our Golden Girls are like, oh, I think we need to go. Like, this is a little too much. And when the guys get rejected, they get angry, like men do.
Yeah.
Horrible, horrible, evil men. And they get mad. And they're like, well, that was our charity. We didn't have to go after you. We just felt bad for you because you were the old hags in the group.
I don't remember them saying that. I remember them saying, oh, there's plenty of other people who will take our money.
Yeah, but they said, and who aren't the oldest ones in the room. Like they were saying they were doing them a favor.
Okay.
And that they were, they were legitimately going for the low-hanging fruit because they themselves were in from Kenosha, and it was so weird for them to want to be with hookers. And so that was like their whole thing. And then when they got rejected by the ones that they thought were the lowest hanging fruit, they immediately turned around and did the angry, horrible thing that happens to women all the time. And and then were like very rude and caused Dorothy to be like, excuse me. But before she could go into her speech where she ripped them a new one, the front doors swing wide open. Dun, 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 dun. The cavalry's here. Arrest them all. You're all under arrest for solicitation.
Yes, the police raid the place and they go to arrest everybody. Dorothy says, oh, there must be some mistake. We're innocent. And then all the other ladies start going, oh, yeah, I'm innocent too. I'm innocent too. And she kind of realizes like, oh, there's nothing we can do. So, yeah, he says, like, the wagons will be here soon. And, I guess this probably happens from time to time in a hotel that is devoted exclusively to sex trafficking. The wagons. But
clearly not because, Blanche was able to call and make a regular reservation.
Yeah, but it almost seemed like she was the dummy that didn't realize, like everybody else knows that the only time you go to this place is, to pay for sex. And they're like the only people who don't realize that. And that's why they get caught up in this whole
because that would be something that was like a word of mouth thing that was told from man to man, whereas like women wouldn't know. Yeah,
so we get taken to jail. And obviously this one is got, there's sex workers everywhere.
Right, because they were all arrested together, and the Golden Girls are being charged with the same crime.
Yeah. Rose has a very funny sort of spotlight moment.
Oh, multiple. She's got 2 in this episode.
Yeah. It starts with like when they're waiting for the paddy wagons to show up, and she's anticipating going to jail, and she goes, oh, I can't go to jail. They always prey on the weak and innocent there. She goes, I'll be mocked for working hard at my job at the library. And then she just proceeds to describe this whole scenario of what
she goes on like a fever dream of all the things that might happen, and she's like, from that time on, I won't know a moment's peace. And she just like, and then when she gets to the end, she's like, I don't want to live.
No, it's really good. But yeah, I would say all in all, that part that you're talking about where they first realize that they've been mistaken for prostitutes. Yeah. And Dorothy is like, do you realize what they think we are? And then, later on, we'll get to Rose having this whole relationship with this young woman.
Well, and that also, when they're in the jail cell, and Rose has that second moment where she talks about the great disappointment in her life of losing out on Butterqueen. Yeah. And she gets another whole monologue where she tells the story of Butterqueen. And that's how this girl who's been kind of hanging in the back, arrested with all of them. But she hears her talking about Butterqueen, and she kind of comes up to the front and she's like, you're from Mount Olaf? I'm from, or St. Olaf or whatever. I'm from whatever, Mount something next door. We're neighbors. Mount Gustav next door. And so then, and they start talking. Yeah. And
but what I would say is that this episode, The Golden Girls, really has the most judgmental and just sort of wrong-headed view about sex work. Like, this is the one that really, I think, takes that 80s mentality of like, oh my gosh,
Yeah, well, Blanche even at one point is like, I don't want to be here, and I don't want to be in here with this trash.
Yeah, well, so that starts a very funny sequence where Blanche calls the woman trash.
Well, she's calling out to the guard. She's like, you have to get me out of here. I don't want to be in here with this trash. Yeah, and all the other women are like, excuse you.
So this one lady steps up. She's like, let's fight. I'll give you the
tallest one. Like, she's going to go for her.
I'll give you the first punch. And Blanche is, she blanches, if you will. She's, she's never been in a fight in her life. And so Dorothy steps up and she just she goes, I did time in Attica. And the woman goes, Attica's a men's prison. She goes, I know. It was a year before they figured it out.
Or like 3 months, I think she said.
No, she said a year.
It was a year? Wow. I thought it was 3 months.
I love, like, when B. Arthur is able to, like, she has that self-awareness, like, she knows how to kind of like make fun of herself in a way that she still retains all of her dignity. Yes. And it's still just such a hilarious concept to think of B. Arthur in Attica prison for a year, and then they finally discover that she's a woman. But yeah, so she intimidates that lady, and she backs off.
And then she turns around and they were like, how did you do that? And she's, clutching her pearls. And she was like, well, I've worked in public schools for all these, for 30 years. It's basically the same thing, which is so sad.
Yeah, but then we get the whole Rose thing that you're talking about, the Butter Queen thing. She has a funny thing where she says, they couldn't even trip me up with a trick margarine question, so, but then,
there was churn tampering.
Yeah, churn tampering. She befriends this younger lady, and that's where you get all of the but how did you end up this way? You can't possibly be happy with how your life has turned out, and just all this very sort of moralistic, this stuff that just, to me, watching it,
no one would actually choose this as a career.
Yeah, which, look, granted, I think many people are still sort of that opinion, we don't necessarily want to be sex workers, but it's just it really plays off. Comes across as just lame and moralistic and just dated.
Yeah.
I don't know what Sophia is the one that comes to the rescue this time.
Sophia comes to bail them out, and they realize that it's still in time for them to get to the party, or at least the end of the party.
Sophia says she's the only one that makes sense, not to be mean about it, but she goes, I can't believe these cops were so dumb that they thought anybody would pay to sleep with you guys.
I know.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is exactly, all of that would have been figured out later on. The cops who are raiding a brothel don't make those distinctions.
Sure.
They're just picking everybody up. So she's there to bail them out, and but her terms are somebody's got to give up their ticket so she can go see Burt Reynolds, and they tell her no.
Yeah.
And so she swipes the tickets out of Blanche's hand through the bars, and when they come to release them, they say, okay, Mrs. Petrillo, which ones are your roommates? And she was like, they're not here. And she turns around and walks out. So then they're left there, and that's when Rose has the thing about the disappointment because she's going to miss meeting Burt Reynolds, and does the whole butter churning story, and then makes friends with the girl. And we see a little bit of not a turnabout in anybody's opinions, but there is a little bit of just a little bit of the writing is given over to this girl kind of and her journey where, she's sort of saying, yeah, it was I came down here and kind of fell into this, and now I feel like I can't really go home, but also I don't know if I want to go home, kind of a thing. And then, kind of happy with her life or whatever. And then the next day, or I guess it's not the next day because obviously they've tented their house. A few days later, they're home and safe and everything's fine. And Sophia is regaling them all with the story.
Yes, hobnobbing with all the celebrities, Dom DeLuise and Mr. Burt Reynolds and all of his friends.
And all the things. And the girl stops by, because Rose has said, if you need anything, please get in touch, and all. And so the girl stops by and she's like, hey, so, thank you for your advice and thank you for talking with me. I've decided to go home. And she's like, oh, I thought you liked your life. And the girl was like, yeah, but I realized I didn't want to be as old as you and still in this business.
Yeah. So Rose has saved her by her mistakenly thinking that Rose is a, 65-year-old prostitute or whatever, and she doesn't want that to befall
50,
her.
but okay.
Yeah, to me that was the most frustrating part. I thought, just the thing of the girl stopping by and being like, "Oh, you saved me from my life, and I'm going to go back to Europe or whatever." I don't know. That just
Europe. I'm going to go to
wherever
Mount Gustav or whatever.
But yeah, that just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. But then, of course, we get Mr. Burt Reynolds himself stops by. And it's funny because we had watched this episode on our own.
Yes.
But we had watched it randomly when we were killing time before we had to go somewhere. So we didn't make it till the end. So I always thought of this as one of those sitcom tropes where you're always mentioning the celebrity, but they never actually show up.
Right.
But no, this is the sitcom trope where you're always mentioning the celebrity and then they show up at the very end for a 2-second cameo.
Exactly. A little funny cameo. So just looked it up. Blanche lies about her age all the time, so it's kind of hard to tell, but the internet believes that she was 53 season 1, making her 54 here in season 2.
Sure, I could buy that. So, yeah, look, tracking the tropes, we have sex workers galore. That's going to be the focus of this episode. That's going to be what they get arrested for.
Right.
This is, sort of the opposite of Mary Tyler Moore in the case that this is wrong place, wrong time. This is a comical misunderstanding.
Exactly. This is not an issues episode, although this, like the Mary Tyler Moore episode, is one of the highest rated episodes and one of the very famous episodes of Golden Girls for the Betty White speeches. Those two Betty White monologues that Betty White has become this cultural icon, this being such a heavy Betty episode, I think it's become this beloved thing that people will quote even.
Yeah, well, and you really see how good they are at handling the ensemble, because Blanche is the one driving the whole story. So much of it has...
And at the end, when Burt Reynolds says to Sophia, which one of them is the slutty one? And all three of them go, me!
Yeah.
And that's the tag that they end the episode on, is the three of them standing there with their hand in the air I'm the slutty one, after having said, you can't arrest me for solicitation. I'm not like that.
Yeah, it is just the fact that everyone was so horny for Burt Reynolds is just so funny to me.
The jumping up and down and squealing throughout, I think 3 times during the episode.
Even Dorothy, when Dorothy is jumping up and down, it's serious.
I never, not my bag. No.
Well, it's the generational thing. I'm so glad that I just barely missed out on this time when you had to be super hairy and have this thick bushy mustache and stuff.
Except for those are the guys you think are handsome. It's the Al Borland lumberjack look.
Now, there's a difference. I can't explain it, but there's a difference. Al Borland is a teddy bear. Burt Reynolds is like a predator of some kind. He always had a skeevy vibe to me. I always felt like Tom Selleck was the more approachable version.
Yes, but still not attractive to me. Yep.
But yeah, it is. It's just a riot to me. Just the same way, in Saved by the Bell, when Mel Gibson is the one that they're always mentioning, just the different go-to hunks, of the different eras. But what I was saying was just the way Blanche is driving the story the whole time. And then, Dorothy just has these occasional moments where her moxie is so critical. And then, Sophia is the odd man out. And so she gets to have all of her stuff trying to,
the one-liners.
Sort of, and just her function in the story of being excluded and then ultimately getting the better of them.
Right.
And then Rose is almost neither here nor there in the plot, except that she gets these amazing speeches, and then they toss her this subplot with the young girl, and just it's just so everybody has their place, and it just really kind of clicks and flows. Okay, moving on to Ellen.
Season 2, episode 21, 3 Strikes.
Yep, first time talking about Ellen on the podcast. I remember when this came out in the 90s. It was originally called These Friends of Mine, I believe.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And then they rebranded it as Ellen. This is such an interesting situation, such an odd duck of a sitcom to me, because as we saw when we were watching this, Ellen in this season 2 episode has not come out as gay yet.
Yep. We're 2 seasons away.
I assume either in real life or in the show. And,
I mean, she was out as a human being, but not publicly,
in the headlines.
Right, in the headlines, exactly.
And so when she eventually comes out on the show, it is literally historic for being the first, maybe not the first character, the first
the
lead
first main character,
whatever it is, and is so sort of critical for that reason. But I gotta say, aside from that, the show is so unremarkable. And when you go back in time to this point where that hasn't happened yet, it just kind of makes me go boy, they really liked giving sitcoms to stand-up comedians and just seeing what would happen.
It's funny that you kind of sound like Michael Eisner, the head of Disney at the time, and this was an ABC sitcom. And those were the notes that the show was getting in late season 2 and season 3. The main character wasn't interested in dating, wasn't interested in relationships, which is what all good sitcoms are about. Then they said, well, why don't they just give her a puppy or something? Those were the notes they got from the studio about their show. And that's why the episode 2 seasons from now, in season 4, when she comes out, is called the puppy episode.
Yeah. Yeah, what strikes me is not, again, we just watched this one episode. It doesn't focus on dating except her mom being obsessed with her, finding
a husband and having grandkids. Yeah, giving her grandkids.
Trope. But I just mean more like, come on, it's called These Friends of Mine. Like, it just seems like generic and uninspired, I guess.
I mean, there was a show called Friends.
Yeah. And I guess, but that's what I'm saying is like, you see this show. I guess for one thing, it just, you see this cast, it just makes me sort of similar to The Class, and some of these other sort of like also ran sitcoms that we've covered where they're just completely populated by these familiar people. And you just kind of realize like, there are these same like 100 or so actors like floating around LA, and they just all
they move from one small sitcom to the other. And look, I think, like this one, like Grace Under Fire, there a lot of these sitcoms that, like you said, are just given to comedians, and they aren't just given to comedians. Obviously, it's a big, huge thing. But yeah, the writers' rooms are, all about the voice of their main person. And there's lots to, this was the Dick Van Dyke Show too. Carl Reiner wrote it for himself. Yeah. And then it was like, you know what? I think this would be funnier if Dick Van Dyke does it. You know?
And I guess what I'm saying is that it comes down to the particulars for me. And like Seinfeld and Friends are very low concept, but it was those particular people. You got Jason Alexander and Michael Richards and Julia Louis-Dreyfus and all the friends and all the rest of them. And with this one, like the horn dog friend is that guy that went on a date with Jennifer Aniston in 1 or 2 episodes.
In the like main episode where she leaves the message and tells Ross that she, cares about, has feelings for him.
There's like an overweight guy that's like a kind of familiar like sitcom character actor. Like these are all like just the usual suspects.
Yeah. There's Jolie Fisher.
Yeah. And that for me, it's not on the same caliber as a Seinfeld.
Oh, no, absolutely not. But that's what I was saying. The comparables here are like Grace Under Fire, King of Queens, any of these shows that were relatively long running, 5+ seasons, and they're comfortable. This is before streaming still. We're in like 1995 or something, 1994 right now. You have shows that are just on TV because there's time on TV, and they were better than all the other ones. And they had Ellen, who was a relatively well-known stand-up comedian at the time. Stand-up. And by the way, Ellen is funny in this show. Like that to me, this is a better show than Everybody Loves Raymond, even though Everybody Loves Raymond ran for 10 friggin' seasons or 12 seasons or whatever, and has all of this exactly like what Michael Eisner was talking about, relationship and family drama that Ellen doesn't have. Yeah. Ellen's so boring because it's just about this woman who wants to work at a bookstore and hang out with her friends. It's Ellen herself and her comedy that is funny. And why the magic didn't happen is that they didn't have the writer's room to write for this ensemble and make it so fun. That horny character doesn't turn into Joey.
Yeah. I mean, Seinfeld had Seinfeld and Larry David writing the actual shows, and Friends just, had stronger writers, I guess. It is a tough spot to be in, to be tempted to defend Ray Romano as being the stronger comedian of those two. But I think Yeah, it's hard to say. Again, like, besides watching it way back in the day, we just watched this one episode. But for me, the jury's out. I'm certainly not going to say that Ellen was, I wouldn't use words like annoying or insufferable, but I wouldn't say like, oh, I thought she was really funny. I had a skepticism of her whole vibe. And look, it's a show from 30 years ago. There's lots of things from the 90s that just
to me, it was like watching Dory as a person.
Yeah.
Dory
Fair
the fish
enough.
from Finding Dory and Finding Nemo. So that's what it felt like. Because she is sort of like floundering and lost in life and just hanging out with her friends.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of funny. So this episode starts where we've got Emily from 90210.
Yes, Emily Valentine. Christina Leese is the actress's name. She's
Yep.
also in Child's Play 2.
Yep. She always has this like sort of like shock, very blonde,
Yes,
almost
a
white.
bleach blonde style.
Short, like pixie cut hair.
Yeah, I had a big crush on her when I was a teenager.
she always had this very striking look that was like she was like kind of like the bad girl at your high school,
definitely.
but not the bad girl that was gonna like beat somebody up, but like the bad girl that like
smoking in the courtyard.
like was into bad things, like naughty things or whatever. So she is against Fur, and she's leading a rally to like a sit-in or a protest or whatever against this store that is selling fur. And Ellen has decided that she wants to be more of an activist and get more involved and do something and not just like float through life. So she's decided she wants to get involved in this anti-fur movement because the animals. And when we went to watch the show, I didn't do any research ahead of time, so I didn't know if we were before or after Ellen's coming out. And so I spent the whole like first kind of 10, 15 minutes of the show being like, oh man, this like Emily Valentine character, her name's not Emily Valentine in this episode, but this Emily character is so queer-coded. Ellen is getting involved with this fur protest because she wants to get with that girl. And by the way, that girl looks just like Anne Heche, which was her girlfriend at the time, or like soon to be her girlfriend.
She's not coded just because, as you pointed out, she has this same look in everything she does,
Absolutely.
and she's always
but
straight.
in this, she was like very much like putting the men off. Like the horny friend was sitting on her. She's like, no, not having it. Like, and the whole thing about like, we got to save the animals and all of it, it just was like, it felt very queer coded. And so I was like, oh wow, this is so cool. They're already laying, if she hasn't come out yet, they're already laying these Easter eggs. Like, is she going to drive a Subaru? You know what I mean?
Well,
like,
I think that was always part of the identity of this show, was she was a very liberal, sort of character. And again, it's the mid-90s. We're getting into all of that. And I remember that as being a thing.
She's going to do this protest, and she's gotten all of her friends involved. So Jolie Fisher and the other guy are all involved. They're not really interested, and they're sort of like embarrassing her in front of Emily. Again, this is why I feel like she's trying to impress this girl and all of these things. And I was like, ooh. And then, of course, that all just kind of like disappears. The protest happens without us even seeing it. They leave to go to the protest. And the next thing we know, we're in a jail cell.
Yeah. Now, I should say one thing that I kind of like about the mise en scène, if you will, in Ellen. She likes to do like all sitcoms. It's an old comedy thing of like, oh, you'll never see me riding a horse, and then cut to riding a horse. But this show loves to do the like really abrupt. The cold open is her driving, trying to stay awake while driving, and she's got the interior monologue going. She's like, oh, I'll just rest my eyes, and then it's like immediate cut to her having crashed into a cow pasture or something. And in this, you get, when they're at the bookstore and they're getting ready to go, and she goes like, with all of these people doing something so good, what bad could possibly happen, or something like that. And you get the like really abrupt hard cut to she's in jail.
Yeah.
And that's it. And then we get no sex workers this time.
This hilarious scene with this guest actress who had me in stitches. Like the interaction between the two of them. This woman's just throwing a racquetball ball against the wall, and Ellen goes to sit down on the other bed, and she goes, "That's mine." but she's sitting on the bed, like, the bed that would then be Ellen's. And she's just not making eye contact, not speaking, throwing this ball against the wall. And Ellen is doing the thing, and we didn't track this trope, but we should have. When these women get put in jail, because Mary Tyler Moore did this too. She was like, "Oh, the nervous talking.
Yeah.
Oh, tell me if I'm bothering you, but I just have this thing where I just talk. I have like verbal diarrhea when I get into a stressful situation." So, and that was like the setup with Mary Tyler Moore and the sex workers that she was in the cell with. And the same thing is happening now. We also had that with Blanche. She was like freaking out and having the verbal diarrhea because she was so nervous, and Rose too. They kind of did it in bits and pieces. They didn't do the thing of like, you guys need to shut up like they do in these other episodes. Or them saying, like, I just talk so fast and so much when I get nervous. But that's what Ellen is saying. And she finally goes over and she's, like, trying to, like, lean against the wall to talk to the woman. And there's the toilet there. So we get the, second mention of the toilet. The first one, because Deborah does it.
Yeah.
And Everybody Loves Raymond. She also does the nervous talking. That's one of the things. No sex workers this time, but nervous. I'm in jail, I'm in trouble talking.
Yeah. We get the sort of menacing cellmate, and they do this little visual bit that just goes over like gangbusters for the studio audience where...
Yes, this is the part I'm telling you that like Ellen is funny. This is funny.
She says like, she does the little zip up my mouth and lock away the key thing.
She says... So what are you in here for anyway? And she was like attempting to strangle my roommate. Oh, well, why did you do that? She talked too much. And so Ellen does this whole bit where she like locks her mouth, tucks the key in her pocket, and then digs for like 5 minutes to get the key back out, the fake key back out of her pocket so she can unlock her mouth and say one more thing, and then locks her mouth again, goes to drop it in her pocket, and then the cellmate holds out her hand, and the audience cracks up. And the timing was great. I'm telling you, this whole scene was very funny. Yeah. And she holds out her hand. Ellen drops the key, the fake key, into the woman's hand. And the woman kind of stares at her for a minute and then opens her mouth and swallows it.
Yeah. So yes, it's a funny bit that the crazy cellmate totally buys into her little make-believe key thing in order to tell her like, yes, don't talk to me. And then we meet, I mean, I'm sure we're not meeting them for the first time, but I meet Ellen's parents. Right. They come to talk to her through the glass. I think this is the first time we've had that jail trope.
Yep. Everybody else has come to the bars.
Yeah. They talk to her through the glass. Her dad is the inspiring math teacher from the Wonder Years.
Yes. But he happens to be a patent attorney as Ellen's dad. So he's like, I'm going to represent you. I'm going to get you off.
They're, of course, all like, oh, what have you done? How did this happen? The mom says, it was those mad magazines. Damn you, Alfred E. Newman. Yep. I thought that was a funny line. And so, they say, okay, don't worry. We'll defend you in court. So Ellen's going to appear in court with her dad as her lawyer. The judge is another ubiquitous character actor, the little stocky Asian guy.
Yeah, he gets immediate applause. Like the minute the camera goes on him, he gets applause. And I'm like, is this because he looks like Judge Ito? And that was like, we're only a few years after the OJ trial? Or no, we're right in the middle of the OJ trial. If this is, this is 95. So we're like we're in the whole
that
OJ
much like him. Judge Ito had the beard.
Yeah, famously. No, I know. I mean, he did. Didn't he have the beard in this? No, he didn't have the beard in this. He's just Asian.
Yeah, I thought maybe he was a returning character, and this wasn't Ellen's first time in front of the judge, and maybe that's why he got the reaction. I don't know. Or maybe they like those funny quick cuts to the courtroom, but they come before the judge, and the judge starts talking about, I've got a 30-year-old son. He's a total deadbeat, and basically like the judge and the dad / lawyer kind of get on the same page. The dad says, I think you should release Ellen to our custody, awaiting her trial or whatever.
Yeah, rather than like denying her bail or whatever.
Yeah, and the judge was like,
I was just gonna give her bail.
Yeah, he says, I was going to release her on her own recognizance, but I think counsel's suggestion makes a lot of sense. So Ellen is just like stupefied that she was about to be set free,
right?
But now the judge is sentencing her in
to
a very
go and
sitcom
stay with her
turn.
parents.
Yes, sitcom-y as hell. She has to stay with her parents now in their custody
until her hearing goes to trial.
Yes, and so that's really going to be the crux of this episode. This is going to be Ellen has to live with her parents, and they are like legally in charge of her.
Right.
And yeah, that's kind of there's game night with the friends. She wants to sneak out. I feel like we don't really need to go into all the beats of this story.
Yeah, I mean,
it drives
obviously
her crazy.
she's going to work, but her parents drive her nuts because they're always kind of hounding her to do something else with her life and get a boyfriend and give them grandkids and all this stuff.
Her mom makes her wear a dress to work in order to watch MTV.
Right.
Talk about clues about the gay thing. She says there was a 2-hour special of Cindy Crawford's House of Style.
Yes.
That was the one that perked up my
And
attention.
then she picks up a purse as she's leaving work for the day in her dress, and the whole audience just cracks up because now she is not only wearing a dress, but she's carrying this little tiny white purse that her mom also clearly, made her have so she could do something else. So then Jolie Fisher comes in before she leaves before she leaves work and is like, hey, I got tickets to see Liz Phair, very 1995.
Yeah.
She's like, my mom's not going to let me go. So she's like, I probably can't go. So they invite the friends over for game night, hoping that maybe they can convince the parents to let her go. And it just never happens. And so they decide when it's time for the concert, the friends are, there at the house. The friends go ahead and leave, and Ellen decides to sneak out. But here's the thing. They came in Jolie Fisher's Corvette, so it's only a 2-seater. So not only does she have to sneak out, but she has to steal her parents' car to do so.
Yeah, so she has to steal the car. They, the two friends leave. She says, okay, go, I'll catch up to you. And yeah, the mom and dad come out, and this is where we get our final hard cut, is they go like, honey, we just want to say we know this has been tough living with us and living by our rules, but you've really earned our trust. Yeah. And then it's the hard cut to her driving. She said she was going to bed early, but she's driving the car. She gets pulled over by a police officer, and they wind up back in court. And
because the car was reported stolen.
Yes. And they wind up back in court. And this is where, like, the family sort of unites against the judge, right? The judge is kind of calling
at first, the judge kind of realizes. So it comes out in court that the reason she's back here and hasn't been able to, like, keep her nose clean during her probationary time with her parents is that her parents, when they knew she snuck out, rather than being like, hey, young lady, you shouldn't have taken the car, they reported the car stolen to teach her a lesson.
Yeah.
And the judge was like, you don't teach your 30-year-old daughter a lesson by reporting the car stolen. Like, the Justice Department is not your own personal parenting assistant. Yeah. Please don't do that. And so he starts going in on the parents, and Ellen turns around and is like, whoa. They're good parents. I was raised right. Look at me. And he's like, and then all of them
the
gang
mom
up
is
on
like,
the
she's
judge.
better than your 30-year-old deadbeat son.
Because he had mentioned his kid earlier in the first
and the
hearing.
mom initially wanted to try to set
them up,
Ellen.
exactly.
So so the comical end to this is that the whole family ends up in jail. The dad, I guess, goes to his own men's cell.
Yes.
And mom and Ellen are in jail together. The mom starts criticizing.
Well, the mom is doing the ball throwing.
She's
like
ball.
sitting in the exact same spot, throwing the ball the same way the woman was the first time Ellen was in jail.
Yeah.
But then they have a little bit of a heart-to-heart, and then the last little tag scene is all of them in the car, because they've all been released on their own recognizance, all of them in the car on the way home, and we get, they're listening to Born to Be Wild, and they start doing the Bohemian Rhapsody thing from Wayne's World where they all do the head banging when they get to the, chorus part of it.
Yeah. So yeah, tracking the tropes again. No sex workers, the same sort of like fish out of water. Haha, she got thrown in jail,
Yes.
and there's like a more hardened person in there with her. But yeah, this one.
Yes, to the nervous talking in the cell.
And we get a court case in this one, which I feel like we don't get in any of the others.
Yeah,
right?
we actually get we get a judge, we get
We're going to get a sort
courtroom.
of hearing for Deborah
right,
in the
we
next
do.
one.
It's a
but yeah, I feel like this one the focus is the parents, and and this is
and the interaction between the two. And honestly, this was the part that was cringy because we know what we know, that Ellen is gay and is going to come out, and that it just kind of feels like shitty that was the comedy that like she was having to write and be a part of on her show. Like, no wonder it's kind of bland and boring because it's not real.
Yeah, anytime, people having to pretend to be a different sexual identity is just depressing. And
but it wasn't even that. It was like she was having to, you could see in her expressions when she was kind of shouldering the burden of her mother's nattering about getting married and finding a nice man and always trying to set her up with a boyfriend. Like, that is something that you see happen all the time. Like,
exactly.
with straight women, and it is annoying. But there was like withering looks in Ellen's response to that, and maybe I'm reading into it, and like maybe she was just acting like whatever, but it really it felt like those hit harder because of who Ellen is.
I mean, regardless, it's like she's trying to use that trope, of the Cathys and the Tina Fey characters of the world of like, oh, my mom's always on me to get a man. And that's like how she's sublimating her like closeted sexuality is like, well, I can't do that yet in the sitcom, so at least I can do that trope of like, mom, get off my back, and she doesn't have to be like making out with dudes all the time. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this, it's going to focus on the family dynamic, and in a lot of ways this is the most sitcom-y one because it is jail as a means of like a wacky, plot turn to get the adult child to have to live with the parents.
Yeah.
All right, let's finish it up with Everybody Loves Raymond.
Season 7, episode 21, The Shower.
Yep, it's a bridal shower for Amy, who is Brad Garrett's character's fiance.
That's
right.
right.
So Ray's brother is getting married. I guess this is probably a storyline that sort of hangs over this whole little era, I would imagine.
Yeah, honestly, it happens kind of fast. There's probably like 6 or 7 episodes before this. They break up. But then they get back together, and then they're pretty much like kind of quickly engaged after that. And so now they're getting married. And this is where we get Georgia Engel again.
She is Amy's mom.
She's Amy's mom. And so we're having the bridal shower. Deborah is the matron of honor, but she doesn't like to say the word matron because it makes her sound old. And she is hosting at, I guess, Amy's apartment. She's hosting this shower. But, of course, the mom, Marie. Yeah, Marie, Ray's mom is, kind of butting in and trying to take over. And Deborah's like, please just let me have this thing. I just want this to be my thing. I'm handling the appetizers. I'm handling everything. But then Marie shows up with, her fabulous Italian cooking and like 4 different appetizers. And everybody at the party is like, these are so amazing. And then nobody's eating the stuff that Deborah prepared, and so she's feeling, put down and slighted again. And she ends up yelling at Marie, and then Marie leaves, all like, "Oh, no one needs me. I'll just leave."
Which I have to say, this whole scene, like, obviously, this is
that's all the setup for like what the crux is of the show.
Yeah, well, but this is also one of the cruxes of the whole series. This relationship between Deborah and the mother-in-law, and of course, you understand where Deborah's coming from, but in this particular situation, like, It didn't seem like she handled it that well.
No, and because this isn't the main story of the episode, they're trying to just build on the fact that we're at basically the end of the 7th season, and you know that they already don't get along.
Yeah.
So they start from a conversation that had happened prior to that we didn't see, which was, I am in charge of this and you're staying out of this because I'm the matron of honor and it's my job, not yours. Please stop butting in and taking over. And Marie's like, oh, but I just want to help. Anyway, so yeah, it all goes badly and Deborah loses her cool and she yells at Marie in front of everyone and it's like record scratch and everyone's like, ooh, awkward. And then Marie leaves. And then, so then Deborah gives the toast and downs, some champagne. And then the next thing we see is they're cleaning up and Deborah's leaving and she goes to start the car and she takes a big deep breath and she turns off the car and she calls Ray and she's like, hey, when you get this, please come and get me. I had, a few too many champagnes because your mother and I'm, sitting here outside Amy's. I don't want to drive. And then she kind of just rolls over. She leaves the keys in the ignition so she can have the radio on. And she just kind of lays the seat back, turns on to her side and kind of rolls over just waiting for her hubby to come pick her up, which he never does because he doesn't check the messages on their answering machine. And she is woken up by a tap, tap, tap of a mag light on her window.
Yeah, and we debated about this a little bit because this is one of those weird legal things. My understanding was always you're not allowed to have the key in the ignition if you're drunk, and even if you're not driving.
And that is what they say. And they live in New York, right? They're in Queens. And and so that is what they say later in this episode is the law. Yeah. Where in Florida, when I was coming about, I had a friend in college who was arrested, keys not in the ignition, keys in his pocket. And he basically was party was over, he went and sat in his car out in front of the party, because he knew he couldn't drive, but he was just in the driver's seat and he had the keys on him. Yeah. And that he got arrested and lost his license for 6 months.
And so just the fact that we're having this conversation sort of indicates this is what makes this one different than the others, is it's not a comical misunderstanding. This is actually something that happens. Yeah. Somebody leaves a bar, whatever, decides they're too drunk to drive, goes to sleep in the car, gets woken up by a police officer. This is a much more sort of down-to-earth scenario. And so we get, Ray. We haven't had much of Ray at all in this episode yet. He gets woken up by Deborah calling from jail. He has a funny, where are you? Jail? And, he's like, all right, I'm coming. And he goes down there. This one, again, no sex workers. This is just kind of random extras in the background, right? The extras, the cellmates don't even look that outlandish. They're just other people.
They're just other women that are, there overnight. Deborah makes a, awkward comment about the toilet. She does the nervous talking. She's pacing back and forth. She's in one of these holding cells that is a cage on 3 sides.
Yeah. It's like a bed freestanding against a wall.
Yeah. So one side is a wall, and then the other 3 sides are the bars, and so they can do a lot of angles on this set where they're she's talking through the one side, and then Ray comes around to the other, and then they're talking at the corner, and then Brad comes in and is walking by in the hallway and notices that, oh my God, why is Deb arrested?
The brother says, my God, she finally killed Mom when he sees her.
That's right.
Yeah, Ray is funny. When he shows up, he says, I want you to know while you were in here, I never thought of anybody else. I thought that was a funny
the whole hour
line. Yeah. And so, of course, she says, well, whatever you do, don't tell your parents. And he's like, oh, well, I kind of already did. And so the mother comes in. Yeah, ultimately, it sort of comes out the mother, Marie, becomes convinced that Deborah's an alcoholic.
They're back at the house. Marie's doing her thing of making it all about her. And Deb is just like, I really want to go to bed. It's been kind of an awful day all the way around. And after, she goes up to bed, that's when Marie is like, all right, everybody find all the alcohol. And she opens the fridge and she pours out, the half a bottle of white wine that's
She's
in there.
been dramatic since when Ray explained the situation. She was like, she was in the car. They pulled her over, whatever. And she's like, drunk and driving, and she's just all kind of, just clutching her pearls and, totally aghast.
Because Deborah doesn't want to say what she got arrested for. And then she was like, it was just a misunderstanding, a traffic misunderstanding or whatever. Then it all comes out. And that's when she freaks out about drunken driving. So then the next thing we find out is that Brad's there like the next day or something and lets her know that he's fixed it. But, she's not going to have her license until the hearing.
Yeah, her license is suspended.
And it's a DMV hearing. You have to, wait 6 weeks or whatever until you have this DMV hearing. But there won't be any, criminal charges or anything like that because Brad Garrett's character is a cop.
Yeah.
So he's able to, he got the arresting officer to say he wasn't going to press charges. She wasn't driving. But there's still this, if you get arrested for this, it depends on what, state you're in, but you lose your license no matter what until you have a hearing.
And so, they're going to have to go to not a courtroom, but a little
DMV office room.
And so then, Deborah's butting in at the hearing.
Yeah, now 6 weeks has gone by. She has had to live this life where she's running all of her errands, but she's actually being run to all of her errands by Marie because her husband refuses to step up and do any of that work. And so she is, of course, frustrated at her wit's end. She's tired and she's at this DMV. And since no criminal charges were pressed, it should be a simple, open and shut thing. Here's your license back, but it's not. This guy's trying to, do his due diligence or whatever. And he's another character actor that's kind of recognizable. And, and so then Deborah is everybody's trying to sit at the table like they're her attorney. Marie comes and sits next to her and the DMV guy has to be family in the back, please, back row. And Brad Garrett comes in and is like, Ma, what are you doing? Get over here, and moves them back into the second row. So Deborah can be at the main table and talk to the guy. And so she's trying to make her case to explain, I wasn't even driving. I was taking a nap. She never says I had called my husband and I was waiting for my husband, which she fucking should say, but she doesn't. And so she's just trying to explain to this guy. And this guy's kind of he doesn't care, but also that's not what this report says. So I'm not here to believe you and listen to all this. He's just trying to move it on to the next thing. But as this family always does, they're always interrupting and things are happening. And so then Marie eventually stands up and is like, it was all my fault. Don't you understand? I did take over the shower. I did. And what she's doing is not actually trying to help Deborah, right? She's again, see, you need me. As soon as the hearing is over and everything is fine, she's like, aren't I nice? Look what I just did for you. I got you out of this because I'm here for you. And you do need me. You've needed me this whole time. You needed me then. You need me right now. And the guy who's in charge of the DMV hearing hears this and is like, wow, okay, I totally understand what you're talking about now.
You have proved your intent to nap. That's what she was trying to say at the beginning, is that I had intent to nap. That was demonstrated by my little hand position and everything. And so he basically lets her off the hook, right?
Well, she's gone 6 weeks without a license, and he's like, yeah, okay, your license is reinstated.
Yeah.
Done.
And so, I feel like this one, more than any, I feel like the jail part is the most sort of incidental in this one, right? It's really just sort of a means to an end.
Yeah, it's just yet another really frustrating situation for, Deborah to have to deal with, where Like at one point she even says, like she goes, Ray, like please husband, please defend me against your mother who is calling me an alcoholic in front of this DMV hearing guy who's going to determine whether or not I get my license back. Like it was, the whole thing was maddening. It was one of these episodes where it's just like, there is no reason that a sane woman would stay in this situation.
Yeah. Yeah, can't really argue with that. So we've got, going back over these, we have contempt of court for journalistic integrity, right?
Yep.
Then we have being in the wrong place at the wrong time and being mistaken for a sex worker at a hotel.
Yep.
We didn't even really get into
public disturbance and vagrancy.
Yeah. We didn't get into in Ellen that she like hit a police officer.
No, it was an accident. She was at her little like sit-in and she leaned down to help somebody stand up because it was over. And as she did that, the security guard came up behind her and started to ask her a question or talk to her. And she had her sign and she turned around and whacked him with it by accident as she turned around, and then he fell down the escalator and took a bunch of people down with him. And so that's when it became this like, oh, well, we have to arrest her. She was getting violent at a protest.
Yeah. So we have that, whatever that is.
It was a public disturbance and vagrancy.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what made her parents go like, are you a hobo?
Are you a hobo?
Now?
And then her dad was like, well, I rode the rails. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, exactly. And then finally in this one, we have, drunk driving sort of by way of formality.
Yes.
So yeah, lots of cases of like the person basically did nothing wrong, but still had to end up in jail for a few minutes for some reason.
Right.
And kind of like coexist with some sort of like hardened lady criminal for a little while.
Get nervous. Look at the scary toilet.
Yeah. So what do we think? Any overall thoughts? MVPs, best and worst?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so Mary Tyler Moore Show and Golden Girls were my favorite too. We have, like we talked about, we have seen that Golden Girls episode, and it's a really wonderful episode to watch Betty White be hilarious. It was one of those ones where on her monologue, they couldn't keep the wide shot because they were laughing so hard. And so you only are seeing Blanche's elbow while she's going on and on about her like fever dream. Like, I want to live. I want to live.
Yeah.
And then the Mary Tyler Moore one I thought was nice because you get that Ed Asner arc that, he is, a very one-dimensional character. He's gruff and tough and never has is cynical, like we said. And it was nice to kind of see that other side of him. And that was a season premiere. Yeah,
and you could understand why. That one was really good. And again, very like organic. Like the whole reason for going to jail and everything was all woven into the premise of the show and what was going on in real life. It was, like I said, having seen the much more serious version of that in the newsroom, 3 1-hour episode arc, that it was obviously like extremely simplified and a little like silly the way it played out in that sitcom-y way, but the basic concept of it is still like, it is still very real. I kind of agree that the Golden Girls is the most fun, I think, because of just the ride that it goes on. Like, it's one of those that just makes that 22 minutes seem, in a good way, like a long time. Like
and it's because they have enough people that the writing is right for, as opposed to Ellen, where the writing is only kind of really right for her. Yeah. And even there...
Yeah, exactly. Ellen is, it definitely was not torturous, but like I said, the jury is out for me. I think her personality, her whole thing of like, oh, I'm kind of awkward and childlike and I'm a little fumbling over myself is kind of like, okay, like it's, it didn't totally win me over in that episode, but I'd be willing to give it another shot. But like I said, it is just interesting to me the way that show, for as historic as it is, does seem kind of unremarkable,
well,
for those
and
first.
here, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk more about this when we do, our episode on the coming outs and the queer coding of characters throughout television history. But I think the sad thing about Ellen, right, the show Ellen, is that once that episode happened, it was like a double episode in season 4 towards the end, middle to the end. Every single show after that was, hey, we're a gay show.
Yeah.
To the point where even, GLAAD was like, okay, we're like, we get it. Like, we're like, you know what? Not every one of our stories is a gay story. Like, sometimes we should just have a story. Like, we just live lives, And I think it got canceled the next season.
Yeah.
It only ran another season and after
look,
that.
You could say, your Will and Grace and your Schitt's Creek, like it paved the way for other
it
shows
100%
that maybe
did. Yes.
were just overall stronger for other reasons. But yeah, there was fun in that one, and the Everybody Loves Raymond. Like, there was definitely fun to be had in all of these. And yeah, again, I feel like there was less overlap than we see a lot of the time. Like, all of these really did approach the jail thing from kind of different ways. It's almost kind of fun the way.
No, it's true. It was fun.
They literally meet in the middle. Like, they almost always go to jail in the middle.
Yeah.
And they kind of have like these very similar scenes, but then everything around them is like a totally different scenario.
Right.
And using it in a different way.
Yeah, which is nice because a lot of times it is beat for beat the same.
Yeah.
And which I think in this instance kind of made those like, oh, look, we're going to make Lady of the Night jokes. Oh, look, we're going to, make nervous talking jokes. Oh, look, we're going to make a toilet joke. Like all of those kind of beats were fun and felt fresh, even though they were the same over and over again. Whereas sometimes it's like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
This is the same.
Yeah, no, I like it when they line up a lot. But yeah, this was fun too, to see just totally different takes on it. All right, so much for going to jail. What are we talking about next week?
Next week, we are crossing over, not in the sense of the afterlife, but we mean television episodes that are crossing over. So we have I Love Lucy, season 6, episode 13, Lucy and Superman, crossing over with Adventures of Superman. We have Silver Spoon, season 1, episode 7, The Great Computer Caper, also starring Arnold Drummond from Different Strokes. And then we also have Full House, season 4, episode 16, Stephanie Gets Framed, featuring our favorite Steve Urkel, and Abbott Elementary, season 4, episode 9, Volunteers. And those volunteers are the cast from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Yep, the crossover episodes are next week. Until then, we will consider this segment of the sitcom study concluded. Thank you for listening to the Sitcom Study. Tell us what you think or share your own TV tropes and topic ideas by sending a self-addressed stamped email to sitcomstudypodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you like the show, consider leaving a rating or review on your podcast app. It helps us boost those precious Nielsen ratings. The Sitcom Study is recorded in front of a live studio dog.